Hi. Um, there are three preliminary comments I'd like to make this morning as I sort of wade into the message for today. The first of all is that I would like to ask for an umbrella of grace. And by that I mean Thursday evening when we were in worship over in the fellowship hall, I waxed nostalgically for a little while. I recalled that it was 1995, my first message in that place and in that location. And as I recall, the Genesis Counseling Center, which has been a part of the outreach and the ministry of this church officially since 1998, but prior to that as a satellite of the Counseling and Mediation Center in St. Augustine, Florida, I've had ample opportunities over the years to be able to be front and center and to speak and to be a part of the rotation and the speaking and the preaching and the telling of the word. And so there is vocational hazards that have to do with some of you who've been around during this period of time. You're going to hear some things you've heard before, and you probably need to hear them again. So, umbrella of grace, thank you very much. Secondly, I want to say to you that what I want to talk about today is something that requires patience. You know the old prayer about the man who was praying for patience said, Lord, give me patience, 1, 2, 3, now. But to be patient with the process of the evolution of your family system in its many aspects and complexities, because the goal here is not perfection. There was a Baptist preacher who was preaching a revival, and he was waxing on eloquently, and he wound up and came forward and said, and so, how many among you is perfect? Congregation kind of moved back and shuddered, and he wound up and came again and said, I say unto you a second time, how many of you are perfect? And they were kind of pensive, and after the third time, there was this dried up old gentleman in the back who raised his hand warily, and he said, and you, sir, you think you're perfect? He said, no, but my wife's first husband sure was. So our goal is not perfection, and I, among all of you, know that I am not perfect. When it came to this, within the context of the emerging church, the Apostle Paul just got this off the table and said, I am the chief of sinners. So there's no longer having to be a contest about who's better. I'll take the low road. It's okay. We all go from here. So what we're not striving for is perfection, but improvement. And as one of my friends tells me, today I'm going to try to do the very best I can, and tomorrow I'm going to try to do a little bit better. And the third thing I want to mention is that in this period of time, over since 1995, I have and we have witnessed the changing landscape of the American family. The family as we knew it growing up, I was exposed to Ozzie and Harriet, although they didn't live on our street. And I was speaking to a young man recently, a millennial, and he's got a baby with a baby mama, and they are estranged. They don't talk to each other. They're now in the process of trying to go to court. He wants to establish that he is the father. They don't want him involved because they don't ever want him to have to do anything with his child. The grandparents are involved. They want to be able to see this child. The complexity of the American family has never been more real than it is in these moments right now. And I said to him, well, this isn't the June and Ward Cleaver family. And he looked at me and his head kind of turned sideways and he looked like a black lab and he went, huh? Although June and Ward never did exist, they certainly don't exist now. And the complexity of the family in our nations today, it's not just those people over there, it's us people right here. In some way, we've all been touched, parents, grandparents. I can't tell you the number of grandparents that I work with who are raising grandchildren with parents who have drug and alcohol issues. One woman I'm working with said to me, I just take my granddaughter on the weekend and try to provide her some zone of safety so that in some way the chaos that she has to live through Monday through Friday will somehow be offset by the kind of sanity I try to create for her. She's had her daughter twice Marchman acted so that she would be mandated drug and alcohol treatment. The pain and the struggles and the suffering that are going on in our community and in our world today is beyond the scope of imagination for most of us. That maybe we see and maybe we don't. In this period of time, I've also been involved extensively with the LGBTQ community, working with different, diverse, complex relationships. And so all of this, not to undercut or undermine, but is just a part of the landscape that we live in now. And so with that comes we who are the church who try to stand in the midst of this and somehow claim and proclaim a norm of what we hold to, but embracing what we don't always understand. And with that comes the words that come to mind to me that from the 1548 version, Thomas Cranmer in the Book of Common Prayer, when a couple would stand before an altar and they would say these words, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part, according to God's holy ordinance, and thereto I pledge thee my faith. Beautiful poetic words, but there's nothing in that language that helps us to understand how to make that happen. And so we don't build a building without a blueprint, and we don't fly a plane without a flight plan, but we get into relationships without having a design for how to make the relationships work. So if I was to become a replacement for John Saunders at International Speedway Corporation, fat chance, but if that were ever to happen, I would be given a document like so, which would have to do with all the rules, roles, tasks, and responsibilities that would be involved in the ISC Corporation, its board of directors, its stockholders, who I would report to, how all of that information would flow, accountability, where I would be visioning this organization to be in 3 to 5 years, what my compensation and financial remuneration would be, and that would be my employee contract. But if I went to work at Donnie's Donuts, right down on Ormond, on Granada, and I had a problem, I would have to just go talk to Donnie. And the point is, the more organized a system tends to be, how the relationship is supposed to work is going to be clearly defined and spelled out. And the more unorganized a system tends to be is that we just make it up as we go. And a marriage or a committed relationship is probably way down on the list, somewhere below Donnie's Donuts on the org chart. We just expect this is somehow supposed to work if we just fall in love. Well, excuse me, the consensus opinion of those who work in the field in which I'm employed, there's 3 articles, segments of books. One is from M. Scott Peck, the other is from Greg Bear, and the other is from Harville Hendricks, that you'll find on the Facebook page of the First United Methodist Church if you want to dig and read into this further. But the consensus of opinion is that falling in love is a temporary state that lasts from about 6 to 18 months, and after that, it goes away. That's why most celebrity romances last about 6 to 18 months. Sometimes they drag it out 3 or 4 years. But after that period of time, they just kind of go their own way, so they're not in love anymore, and so they go to hit for the next crack pipe, which is the next falling in love. So what do we do if falling in love isn't enough? And so what I want to suggest to you this morning is that we have to have a plan. If we're going to get from here to there, if we're going to deepen our relationships, we have to move out of trying to find the light switch in the dark to coming up with things that make clarity, understanding, purposefulness more intentional in our relationships. And so in this process of developing the plan, I have learned over the last 25 years of doing what I do professionally, 41 years of being married, a plan. It's not the plan. God did not give this to me. I didn't get it along with the 9 other commandments. But it is a plan for you to consider and think about how to make your relationships stronger. First of all, I believe there has to be agreement on how we deal with stress. Now, you'll find in the bulletin today a series of texts that have to do with each of these 5 areas. I would invite you to dig into those at your own leisure. There wasn't enough time for me to go into all of these texts today, but I will say to you this: we all have stress. What do we do with it, and how do we deal with it? And we forget the fact that we are animals that have all of this energy that's inside of us when we're threatened to a certain extent, whether psychologically or physically. The definition of stress is the nonspecific response of the body to any demand placed upon it. Secondly, stress is created when one's mind overrides the body's basic desire to choke the living daylights out of some jerk who desperately deserves it. It's not culturally acceptable to do that anymore. And this is my definition: the physiological hijacking that occurs when we fall from purposefulness into reactivity over a real or perceived threat to our physical or psychological safety and well-being. A physiological hijacking, it's as if my brain gets tied up and put into the back of the plane, and there's something else that's flying this at this moment, and I have lost control and have become ballistic, postal, whatever you want to do in order to image what that looks like. When I was growing up, I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. I say this proudly. My father was a bus driver. My mother was a waitress at Dunkin' Donuts. We were poor white trash. I'm proud of that. And we didn't have a lot of money, never did. I started shining shoes in the barbershop when I was 10. Can you play the violin for me at this point? But what we do as a family, this was a family activity, we would take our stale bread, freeze it, and once a month we'd go down and feed the ducks. And I loved doing this as a kid. Inevitably, you'd go out and throw the bread into the water, and the ducks would come, and then 2 ducks would go at it like there was no tomorrow. There'd be feathers flying and honking and squawking and all ever else that's going on. And then as quickly as it would start, it would stop, and the ducks would back off, and they would be flapping their wings, theoretically releasing the adrenaline and cortisol that gets built up in a fight. And then they're back swimming like nothing happened at all. It's over. It's done. But we as human beings can hang on to that stuff for 20, 30, or 40 years. Can you believe that damn duck came over and cut in line in front of me? It was my turn. I had waited patiently. He cut in line. He's a lawn jumper. He must think I'm stupid. I'll never put up with that again. And if he ever comes back here again, I'm going to bite every feather out of his fanny, and he'll never forget my bill again. We can hold on to that stuff, but if we don't learn how to release it and let it go, to get us back into a place where we're centered, balanced, and focused, it only disturbs our inner equilibrium that keeps us into this safe and sacred place. So how do you deal with stress? Biblically, you'll find that in many of those passages, Jesus said that he retreated, he went away, he went to a lonely place, he went off to pray. There are also some athletic references that Paul makes about running and exercise. But it's really about what you do on a consistent basis that helps you to maintain your own inner equilibrium, to be centered and balanced and focused, that hopefully you and a partner are in agreement with. And just before my 30th birthday, I enrolled in my first 5K run in Madison, Florida. Don't you love those shorts? I am so embarrassed. I got some shoes at Pick and Save. Any of you remember Pick and Save? And I put those on, walked around Lake Hollingsworth 3 times in Madison, declared myself ready for the 5K race, got on the front line, took off with the Jackrabbits, made it about a half a mile, and then started praying for death. By the time we finished, the gentleman in the wheelchair and the lady with the walker and the oxygen said, "Come on, Reverend McNeil, you can do it, you can do it." I had overestimated my capabilities and possibilities, but continued running, and then after some years, I switched to making that the gym. It's a regular process and habit for me. Chuck and Carol are regulars there. Shirley Dupree shows up. Terry and Louise are often there. It's a place where I am able to get physical release. I listen to books while I'm working out, and it works for me. The deal here is that you have to have agreement on how you deal with stress. I was working with a couple that he was a fireman and she was a school teacher, and they wanted him home for dinner 3 nights a week, but he was taking karate lessons, and so it created more stress because they weren't in agreement. Brenda, for example, this is her behind her Lexus sewing machine. It is an embroidery machine, and it is something that takes her into a place of inner homeostasis, balance. Much like the priests in the temple, we have to tie a rope on her leg. And so if she's not out in 3 days, we pull her out because she's somehow maybe died. But it's this place where creativity and energy and all of this stuff takes place. And her way of dealing with stress isn't that I'm not going to learn how to run an embroidery machine. I care for her deeply, but not that much. I'm not going to do that any more than she's going to do it so totally my way. But it's about how do we deal with stress and how do we release it and do it on a consistent basis. Secondly, how do we deal with conflict? And there are 3 epidemics that I see in our culture today that do not work. And the first is avoidance, denial, repression, followed by implosion or explosion. You can sit on a beach ball for a long time, but the beach ball always comes back to the surface. Secondly, attack and defend. And so in attack and defend, if you attack me, I will defend myself. And usually what that does is it creates oppositional energy. And when oppositional energy occurs, which we have seen so readily in our culture for the last 18 to 20 months, and it doesn't seem like it's going to end, is when this energy flares. It's right, wrong, good, bad, smart, stupid, winner, loser, love, hate. And so there's so much anger, there's so much rage, there's so much free-floating hostility that's looking for an object to attach to, whether it's a political party, a person, a country, whatever comes around. It's the guy 4 lanes over who doesn't like Scott's FSU sticker that's giving him the middle finger. And so any of that that's happening is just this free-floating rage that's just right below the surface, and it's there at any moment to rear its ugly head. And so once that fires, it takes us into this next aspect of it, which is it becomes win-lose. And when you think about win-lose, winning feels exhilarating. Losing, New England Patriots, feels like dying. Or the Atlanta Falcons. If 10 o'clock tonight, you're going to look in the locker room of the victors, it's going to be wonderful. There's going to be champagne corks popping, and you know, in the losers' locker room, it's going to be doom and gloom, and nobody's going to even remember the loser in another 2 or 3 years from now. Winning is exhilarating. Losing feels like dying. And if you take us back to that stage of our development and throughout civilization, when the gladiators were fighting in the Colosseum, they would turn and look up at the emperor, and the emperor would do the thumbs up or thumbs down, because the thumb down meant you losing your head. Well, that's wired into us as how we're put together as animals. And so when those moments flare and it feels like win-lose, we have to defend, because losing feels like dying. And then the last one really is about ennui, the French word. It means to detach. It means to separate yourself It means you physically may still be there, but emotionally you have checked out. You've gone to another place, and usually is the last segment that happens before someone actually leaves. So dealing with conflict basically is about understanding and being understood. I need you to hear me, what I believe needs to be conveyed at this point, and you can mirror me to let me know that you understand what I'm saying. It's about understanding and about being understood, but it leads us into this next place, which is how do we solve problems? And the default component in the human condition is what's the problem and whose fault is it? It's to establish blame. And blame in its outset is that if I make you feel bad, you will do the right thing. It's what happens on most churches, in Baptist and Catholic churches all across America. I'm going to make you feel bad so you do the right thing. I'm not picking on these people per se, but if you listen to the message, this is what's consistent on how it gets translated. So blame will motivate us in some way if it makes us feel guilty or bad, but effectively after the blame phase goes through, you still have to identify the problem and come up with a way of how to fix it. So the more we can become solution-oriented as opposed to blame-oriented, we can work synergistically together because we are in common with what we're trying to accomplish, and that is to create an environment of mutual love, care, and benefit. D. Edwards Deming, the author of the Marshall Plan, went and transformed the Japanese economy, came back, and some of his practices have been adopted in corporations, GE, Florida Power and Light. But from a calculus standpoint, he had a PhD in calculus from Yale. He said Y equals F times X. Y is results. Results you can't change. Results are audits and financial statements. But if you take the function times new input in any given situation, there are 30 to 50 different possibilities on how to solve a problem. You pare it down to 6 to 10, you come up with 3 to 5, you will get a new result in the future. Problem solving requires synergistic energy, but if one person says that won't work, that won't work, that won't work, about the third time that gets said, everybody shuts down. No work is made towards solving the problem. How do we identify the problem? Can we be in agreement with that? Can we brainstorm on how to fix it? Well, somebody else brings up, what about the time you did this, or what about the time you did that? So one problem becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8, and everybody shuts down because it becomes a contest to prove that you hurt me, so I'm hurting you back, and I have history to prove it. How do we deal with stress? How do we manage conflict? How do we solve problems? How do we balance power? In the biblical models of family that we have, we just really have 2. There's Ephesians 5, and then there is Galatians. Ephesians 5 is more of a hierarchical understanding. It's not unequivocal in the sense that it's mandated that the husband is the head of the family as Christ is the head of the church. It does have elements of accountability to it. It's not just a model of being submissive, but it reflected the social order of the day in terms of how authority and power was understood. And in the Galatians model, there's neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, for we are all one in Christ Jesus. The essential way in which we are created is beyond the gender because the spirit has no gender. The soul has no gender. And so if we live out of that sense of equality, there can be balance in the relationship. And I often see in families after second or third marriages that have taken place, when somebody moves into a house that belongs to somebody else and they never feel like it's their home and they're there as a guest at the discretion of this person because they own the home, creating an imbalance of power. How do we keep it? It is so complex because our world has so radically changed. And the last one, how do we raise kids? This perhaps is one of the greatest challenges that's facing us of all time. How do we raise children? They didn't come with an instruction manual. I took this picture that was the previous one there in a art museum in Lucerne, Switzerland in 1978. And I was deeply moved by this picture because it said to me so much about a little boy, the little boy that's in me, who looks up and is sorry for something he has done. Maybe it wasn't a big thing after all. Maybe it didn't matter too much. But a child who's feeling pain and shame, any adult is probably in some way carrying around some of this pain because we've all been there. How do we raise kids that are healthy and happy? This is Maya and Addison at a pool party last September. These are tiny tot terrorists filling their water syringes, planning on their next terrorist attack at this birthday party. I'm concerned about the world our children and our grandchildren are being raised in. I'm so thankful, but I'm so afraid. This is Christmas time when Addie was giving a karaoke machine that played Frozen. And it had this microphone, and she sang, "Let it go, let it go, let it go." And we were going, "Let it go, let it go." It almost got to go in the pool. We were wondering how long it was going to last. What kind of world are we raising our children in? This was Addie on Christmas Day lining up her iPhone camera to take a picture of her stuffed animals. She is 2.5 years old. When I was 12, I had a Kodak camera that had a square cube on it. And I don't really think I ever learned how to work that one. Our children are being exposed to technology at amazing rates and speeds, and they're being bombarded and influenced. And so how do we create an alternative way, a zone that makes something different, because this is who God has called us to be? Not out there, but in here. It's not magic by any means of the imagination. We are in the process of trying to sell our house. We put it on the lot in November 1st, put it on market, and I would never be so abusive of this moment as to say our house is still for sale. And if you would really like a Florida Cracker house, please talk to me after the service if you want to be my new best friend. But I had some of our Catholic friends telling us, you need to get a St. Anthony medal statue and bury it in the yard. And I said, really? He said, if you bury it in the yard, it has to be facing the house. And I said, oh, okay, sure, right, okay. So this woman brought me one and insisted that I try it. So it's been a while since November 1st, and I thought, okay, what the heck. So I went out in the backyard, and we read the prayers that were supposed to be prayed. We buried St. Anthony down 1 foot into the ground and covered it up and went on our way. I looked both ways to see if anybody was watching me. And then the next day, I went out in the backyard taking some trash out into the woods behind our house. Beautiful view out from our back porch. And St. Anthony had been dug up by an armadillo. And had been laid on the ground like that. It was as if God was saying, McNeil, you stupid idiot. But then I found out it was supposed to have been Joseph and not Anthony, so I must have gotten the wrong statue down, and that's why it came out like that. Making relationships successful is not about magic, but it's about having a plan. How do you deal with stress? How do you manage conflict? How do you solve problems? How do you balance power? How do you raise kids and grandchildren in blended families that are so complex today? How did your family of origin do these things? In my family, whenever my parents were upset, I could tell my mom would be in her bedroom with her head up in her arm like this, and she would be sobbing quietly. And Dad would be in the back room with the door closed, reading stacks of murder magazines. Mom would pout, and Dad would fantasize about killing people. How did your family of origin deal with these things? How are you doing them now? And what would you do differently? What I hope we would strive to do in developing a plan that works uniquely for you is not look at what falling in love is about. Because falling in love is about choosing. And if you choose to fall in love, you fall in love over and over again. We have the template. But we have to have the energy that makes the drive and the desire to make that plan work. For if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and knowledge, and have faith so as to move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. And if I give away all that I have and deliver my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. It is not jealous or boastful. It is not arrogant or rude. Love does not insist on its own way, my way, or the highway. It is not irritable or resentful. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Love never ends. As for knowledge, it will cease. As for tongues, they too shall pass away. As for prophecies, they shall cease. For our knowledge is imperfect, and our prophecy is imperfect. But when the perfect comes, the imperfect will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I gave up childish ways. Now I know in part. Then I will know in full, even as I have been fully understood. So faith, hope, and love abide. These three. But the greatest of these is love. If you want to fall in love, you have to choose it because it first chose you.